very good afternoon to all of you. Nice to see such a large turnout of journalists here in Johannesburg. As you're aware, this is a special media briefing on the occasion of the visit of Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, for the 15th BRICS Summit. Even as we speak, one of the elements of this event is still underway at the convention center nearby. However, since Prime Minister would be leaving later today evening, we have organized this media briefing, and we have the privilege of having with us Shri Vinay Quatra, Foreign Secretary of India, to give us a sense of the conversations that have taken place and answer your questions. We also have with us Mr. Prabhat Kumar, High Commissioner of India to South Africa on the dais, as well as Mr. Ninad Deshpande, Joint Secretary in the Multilateral Economic Relations Division of the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi. Sir, may I give you the floor?
Thank you very much, High Commissioner Prabhat, friends from the media. Thank you very much for coming here this afternoon for this special briefing on the ongoing visit of Honorable Prime Minister of India to South Africa for the 15th BRICS Summit. As you all know, Prime Minister arrived in South Africa on August 22nd, day before yesterday, to participate in the 15th BRICS Summit. And you also know, as has been announced much earlier, that the summit is being held under the theme BRICS and Africa, Partnership for Mutually Accelerated Growth, a theme which has been captured, reflected across various sessions of the BRICS, including the latest session which is currently ongoing, which is essentially the BRICS Africa outreach, as also the BRICS Plus format, where more than 64 participating countries, international organizations are currently engaged in discussion. Prime Minister's first engagement soon after his arrival was the BRICS Business Forum Leaders Dialogue. Very important and a significant part of intra-BRICS cooperation is the BRICS Business Forum. Held a day-long session which was concluded by the BRICS leaders themselves in the evening of 22nd, in which they outlined their own respective visions of how their respective economies can interface with the business ecosystem, business forum ecosystem of the BRICS countries, and in turn contribute to the growth and prosperity of the BRICS countries themselves. In his address, Prime Minister highlighted several key aspects, but I would broadly touch upon four. One, which I just said, that Honorable Prime Minister highlighted that the BRICS Business Forum is one of the key pillars of intra-BRICS partnership among the BRICS countries. Two, what is the significance of India's growth story? What is its value for the intra-BRICS cooperation through the modality of the BRICS Business Forum? The opportunities that the India growth story presents, the value proposition that it brings, whether it is in terms of trade, technology, capital, or all elements of that. Three, given the kind of larger churn and uncertainty that we are all experiencing around the world, he did speak about an important element of the need to develop resilient and inclusive supply chains. We all saw during COVID how the disruption in the pharmaceutical supply chains so adversely affected many of the countries' efforts to provide health security to their citizens. So it was something, a prime example of that. And three, for last, of course, the importance of mutual trust and transparency as the intra-BRICS countries cooperate and grow forward. Later that evening, on the 22nd, Honorable Prime Minister participated in the Leaders' Retreat, which was a closed-door session meant only for the leaders. Yesterday, Prime Minister attended the structural sessions of the BRICS Summit, and later in the evening yesterday, the dinner and the cultural event hosted by the Honorable President of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa. Today, as I just mentioned a little while ago, the BRICS leaders are currently participating in the BRICS Africa Outreach and the BRICS Plus Dialogue, which 65 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In his address today to the BRICS Africa Outreach and to the BRICS Plus event, Honorable Prime Minister highlight what he is a very strong believer in, and he has led this right from the front, is what the BRICS brings on the table for the Global South, for the larger Global South. Honorable Prime Minister himself led the first Voice of Global South Summit ever earlier in January this year, ahead of substantive and intense engagement of G20 leadership beginning. And the whole idea was to really understand from the countries of the Global South as to what are their priorities, what are their concerns, what do they want from G20 which is of value to them. Yes, some of the countries of the Global South are a member of G20, but most of them are not. What are their developmental priorities? How do they see financing from the world for their developmental priorities across different areas? And that's, in a way, he sort of captured a very distilled sense of it in his remarks today. And he also emphasized, as he himself has been, that BRICS should also be a voice for Global South, for the larger Global South, not just for the priorities of the BRICS countries themselves. And he also stated what has always been one of the driving impulses of India's policy, which is a close partnership with Africa and to be a very strong, reliable and a dependent partner of Africa's development journey. In terms of bilateral engagements on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, Prime Minister met with President Ramaphosa yesterday, first thing in the morning before the summit proceedings began, and today held bilateral meetings with leaders from Ethiopia, Senegal, Iran, and the last one was Mozambique. Later this evening, he is also expected to meet some of the thought leaders, I am told, from South Africa. We all witnessed yesterday a historic occasion, and Honorable Prime Minister joined millions of Indians and the entire global community to watch the historic, flawless moment of landing of Vikram rover of Chandrayaan-3, soft landing on the surface of the moon. And he joined this momentous event through video conferencing, and as we all heard, subsequently addressed the nation regarding this scintillating achievement of India and Indian science and technology. Prime Minister was very warmly received, as again we saw right on the day of his arrival, by the Indian community and Indian diaspora here. And another round of welcome and felicitation was there yesterday in the evening after the successful landing of Chandrayaan. A major outcome of the BRICS summit, as the Honorable President of South Africa highlighted in the press briefing earlier this afternoon, is the decision of the BRICS leaders to expand its membership to include 6 new members. These 6 members are Argentina, as was announced, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. As my Prime Minister has said, India has been fully supportive of the BRICS expansion based on whatever consensus is arrived at between the BRICS member countries. We would like to believe that expansion of the BRICS would make it stronger, will bring in the value proposition of the 6 new members to the functioning and to the engagement, intra-BRICS engagement. If I was to capture what Honorable Prime Minister said across his various remarks in terms of specifics, I would say he broadly made, across different sessions, 15 broad key points. And the significance of these 15 points is that they are, one, very, very deeply anchored in India's own capabilities, India's own economic growth and potential, and two, they interface in a very, very complementary way with the countries of the Global South, economies of the Global South, in terms of our cooperative structures in which this operates. So just to briefly, and also an element which is that how the overall international ecosystem of partnerships, cooperation, particularly the UN reforms, are significant. So if I was to just very quickly run through these 15 key points, first being a need to define timelines for the UN Security Council reforms. Two, something which we have been pushing very strongly even in the G20, the need to reform multilateral financial institutions. Why so? Because that's one of the key needs of developmental financing for the developing world. Three, reform of WTO, long-standing, seemingly not moving. Four, which we already achieved a successful outcome today, which was the consensus among the BRICS countries to expand and include 6 new members. Given, as I said, the geopolitical and the economic churn all around, Prime Minister urged BRICS to send a global message of unity and not polarization. Prime Minister proposed creation of a BRICS space exploration consortium, coming as it did in either the backdrop or in the context of India's successful landing of Chandrayaan-3. This couldn't have been more timely and more apt. Made a very specific offer, and we have been making this offer to pretty much any country and every country which is in need, and which is offering the digital public infrastructure stack of India, and not necessarily on commercial terms, but more on value terms. Whatever value you can extract. We call it public infrastructure for a particular reason, because it is more or less public good generally available for the countries of the Global South. Important requirement as we go along essentially of all the BRICS countries has been that how do you map your own skill set availability within the country, the interface with the rest of the world. So he talked about need to undertake skill mapping, skilling and promoting mobility among the BRICS partner countries. He also spoke of something which is very, very deeply at the heart of South Africa and many of the other African countries, that is the protection of the big cats, the 5 big ones in South Africa, of course, under the International Big Cat Alliance. Established also, again, something which is very important for all the BRIC countries, a repository of traditional medicine among the BRICS countries. Also, something which he has again firmly believed in, led from the front, even wrote to all the leaders of the G20, which is inclusion of African Union in the G20. We have strongly proposed it, led from the front, offered our support as a permanent member of the G20. So should probably become G21 if it all goes through in that sense. The other important thing which, as I touched upon briefly also, was that importance for the BRICS countries to be sensitive to the needs of the rest of the Global South, particularly in terms of developmental challenges that they face. BRICS, we all know what it stands for, which is the names of the countries, but the Prime Minister of India also gave a substantive underpinning to what each of the letters of the BRICS could stand for, in which he said B could stand for breaking barriers. You could call it economic, social, political barriers. Revitalizing economies, a central thrust given the kind of difficult times which the post-COVID period has brought for all economies of the BRICS. Inspiring innovation, naturally a direction which all countries of the BRICS want to lead to in future. creating opportunities, and of course, shaping the future. Prime Minister also called for cooperation among the BRICS countries to address this persistent, serious challenge to the ways of our society, which is the challenge of terrorism. So cooperation to counter terrorism. Another global challenge, climate change, so environmental conservation, cyber security, food and health security, a great challenge, and to build the resilient supply chains. Prime Minister also extended invitation to all the countries to become part of many of India's international initiatives. International Solar Alliance, for example, many of you may recall that International Solar Alliance was launched in COP15, I think it was, in Paris in 2015. And it was just two countries, India and France, which launched it, President Hollande and Prime Minister Modi. And now it is 120 plus member organization, essentially spreading the capacity and the knowledge relating to harnessing of solar energy for economic gains, whether it is the drawl of solar energy or other ecosystem. He also spoke about one sun, one world in that sense, and one grid. Coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. Given the increasing intensity of natural disasters, we all talk of disaster mitigation, but one of the key elements of the disaster mitigation is to build disaster resilient infrastructure, which is very, very crucial. One Earth, One Health, and the Big Cat Alliance, as I also spoke about, as also the Global Center for Traditional Medicine. Earlier this afternoon, Honorable President of South Africa gavelled the adoption of the BRICS Johannesburg II declaration. The document is available in the public domain for all of you to peruse, but if I was to just single out in few sentences key things there. One, position on UNSC reform, BRICS position on UNSC reform to expedite it, make it democratic, make it representative of developing countries in the council memberships, not just in general reforms, and to support the legitimate aspirations of course, South Africa, but also Brazil and India to play a greater role in the UN Security Council. Permanent solution on the public stock holding in the WTO, something which I touched upon earlier. Our emphasis on dialogue and diplomacy in the resolution of conflicts, which is posing challenge for them. Need for the BRICS countries to cooperate on counterterrorism, particularly the cross-border movement of terrorists, safe havens, the countries that provide to deal with them. Other important area which is there is the cooperation in the field of medium-scale medium enterprises, small and medium enterprises. Now, while the definition of small and medium enterprises may vary from each country of BRICS to another, but the central thrust is to move forward in cooperation in key areas of development through the small and medium industries. Cooperation in traditional medicine, nuclear medicine, financial inclusion, one of the key, I would say, felt need of the communities within the BRICS which are not part of the financial system, financially excluded communities. So how do you include them financially through technology, through the digital means? Space cooperation, you will not blame me for putting that forward. Green tourism, localization of SDGs, women empowerment. In fact, my Prime Minister speaks not just of women empowerment, but also women-led development, which is qualitatively very different from simply, I would say, part passive, part active portion of women empowerment. So he actively espouses women-led development in all aspects, and climate adaptation. Prime Minister did spend some time in laying before the BRICS and also earlier today India's role in the G20 since we hold the presidency of the G20 this year, and how G20 should also not just put forward but also integrate the priorities of the Global South into the functioning of the G20, which we are trying very, very comprehensively to do. And the inclusion of African Union in the proposed leadership of India to put forward the idea of including African Union as a member of the G20 at the New Delhi summit. Prime Minister received, and he's very grateful for that, extensive congratulations from all the members of the BRICS and also the others at the outreach today on India's successful Chandrayaan mission. But more importantly, it was seen not as India's success, but success of the developing world as such. Why? Because the capacities and the capabilities that such a successful mission brings are of considerable value for the rest of the world also, particularly the developing countries. On the sidelines of the BRICS summit, Prime Minister had interactions with other BRICS leaders. In a conversation with President Xi Jinping of China, Prime Minister highlighted India's concerns on the unresolved issues along the LAC in the western sector of the India-China border areas. Prime Minister underlined that the maintenance of peace and tranquility in the border areas and observing and respecting the LAC are essential for the normalization of the India-China relationship. In this regard, the two leaders agreed to direct their relevant officials to intensify efforts at expeditious disengagement and de-escalation. In all, Prime Minister's visit to Johannesburg, still continuing, has already been very fruitful and productive. As I mentioned, he will be having a meeting with South African thought leaders a little while later, and would be departing South Africa later this evening. I would stop here, and if there are questions, we'll try and take them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Before I begin, open the floor. Ground rules, please introduce yourself and the organization that you represent. And also, please be brief. I give the floor to you there, please.
I'm Namrit Pal Singh. I'm from DD India. So my question is, you said that the Prime Minister conveyed his message to the Chinese President. Did the two have a formal bilateral meeting?
Okay. Yes, sir. Next to you.
Thank you very much. Putin Musumani, Inside Politics. Two questions. The first one is on the... Let me start with this one. What is India's position on the conversation on the use of local currencies? Or perhaps I should put differently and ask, would you support such an idea?
Okay.
The last question.
As your other question?
My apologies. On the first question, your specific point was, what was India's position on the use of national or stroke local currencies, correct?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Okay. And you had another question, if not?
Yes, please.
Please.
The last one would be the proposal on the space consortium. How will it be funded? The space consortium. How will it be funded? Thank you.
Funded? Okay. Ma'am, here, please, microphone.
Dozo Kumalo from Newsroom. His second question is one of the questions that I had. And the second question I have, if we could get a little bit more detail.
Sorry, could you repeat the first question again?
No, my first question
was that one.
Second question around the
He
funding.
stole your thunder.
Yeah, he stole my thunder. But it's obviously big business. So maybe to add to that question is how would we navigate that space for the bloc in that race of the global space race? And then the second question, just to give a little bit more detail on the collaboration around traditional medicines and whether SMEs from South Africa specifically would be part of that collaboration in that space.
Thank you. I'll take one more. I saw your hand up. I will. Yeah. Yes, sir. I'll come back to you. We'll take one round.
Thank you very much. Sipamandla Goge from ENCA. What is India's position on calls and proposals for one BRICS currency? And number two, your take on calls to de-dollarize the global economy.
The first one was on common BRICS currency, right? De-dollarize. Okay, and so we take this round and then we'll take another question. So,
let me just get the question which the colleague from the DD asked about the formal interaction or the formal meeting. Look, as I read out to you, it was a conversation with President Xi Jinping, and as I said, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, Prime Minister had interaction with other BRICS leaders. And in that conversation with President Xi Jinping, Prime Minister highlighted India's concerns at the unresolved issues along the LAC in the western sector of the India-China border areas. A set of questions relating to common currency, national currency, how would you navigate this space, great opportunity, etc. Look, the BRICS have been discussing for quite some time on how to make, I should say, how to put in place a mechanism through which each of the BRICS countries can at least start with doing trade settlements in the national currencies. I'm assuming that was the thrust of your question. So that is one perspective of it. I'll give you another perspective of it, which is that India has recently started taking strong steps in trying to put structures in place for trade settlement in national currencies. So most recently, just a couple of months ago, we signed India Dirham rupee trade settlement mechanism with the United Arab Emirates. Now India's trade with the UAE is roughly $90 billion, more or less balanced. It opens up a good opportunity for both India and UAE to explore that space. Now, so if you were to say conceptually, trade settlement in national currency, we have already started working on it, not just as a discussion or a talking point, but also actually on the ground cooperation. We are also pursuing trade settlements in national currencies with several other countries. So if it becomes a point of highly advanced discussions in the BRICS and the BRICS countries agree to do trade settlement in national currency, I think something which is of a great promise to within BRICS. But you do have to keep in mind that it is each country's decision to do the trade settlement in the national currency. It's not the BRICS decision, it's each country's decision. The reason for that is because there is an extensive universe of regulatory framework that you need to put in place before you do trade settlements in national currencies. After you've done that, you then need to do extensive positioning of your commercial banking channels to be able to do that, because they are the front end, the cutting teeth where the national currency trade settlement actually takes place. I mentioned this earlier someplace also. It's something of great promise for BRICS, and I think I believe the discussions have been very positive and constructed within the BRICS framework. Now, how each country progresses on that is something for each country to decide. We ourselves, even outside the BRICS, have been very, very forward-leaning in moving on trade settlement in national currencies. So far as the BRICS common currency is concerned, okay, I'm supposed to read from this, so
there was no discussion.
all right. No, so look, you can look at BRICS currencies in a common currency. Don't look at it as a BRICS common. Look at it as a common currency, as a conceptual framework. Common currency as a conceptual framework requires a large degree of prerequisite steps before you even begin to discuss that. Currently, it is our understanding that the BRICS systems, the BRICS mechanisms, and the BRICS leaders are focused principally on national currencies trade settlement, and not on anything else with regard to this particular aspect. With regard to the BRICS Space Consortium, the second question, also cooperation in space. Look, there is already a BRICS remote sensing satellite constellation which was established by BRICS during India's chairmanship. Space is a domain in which cooperative framework with other countries. So, for example, India has a SARC satellite which we built essentially for the South Asian Association of Regional Countries. BRICS, as I said, BRICS remote sensing satellite constellation. And the space exploration consortium that we have proposed will essentially take that as a base layer and build on it. Now, obviously, for any such concept to be successful, it has to address the priorities which each of the BRICS countries would have. So the relevant working groups of the BRICS which would deal with this would look into this aspect, identify its elements, and the space of cooperation in space, in the field of space, or space in the field of space, is actually so extensive. It's so, I would say, productive in terms of how we integrate the capacities in this space with our own economic endeavors, that this can be a very, very promising area of cooperation, and something in which, as I said, India would be, has always been forward-leaning in terms of offering its capacities. I think the question of de-dollarization is in a way indirectly inserted. As I said, BRICS are focused more on trade settlement in the national currencies. The details on the traditional medicine and also the involvement. Look, we have the traditional medicine is I would say civilizationally anchored in the Indian society in terms of how society would address the needs of health security. It's a civilization anchor. It has its own, not many people